their sin. Since God is holy and only God can forgive sins, and I put in parentheses divine forgiveness, forgiveness is also a human act toward one's neighbor. There's a difference between how God forgives and how we forgive. We desire to forgive God's way. Because even though it's not in the Bible, we say this a lot, but when God forgives us, He casts our sins into the sea of forgetfulness, and He remembers our sins no more. That's not in the Bible. It's a paraphrase from a couple of other scriptures, so I want to qualify that. But God He doesn't remember things so He can bring them up and throw them in our face. Okay? So when we start talking about getting together, let me get that next slide. When we talk about getting together, even though getting together is the last method that we will employ here in the peacemaking model, for me, it's one of the most important. I won't say it's the most important, but it's one of the most important, because I think going higher is really the most important, because you have to go to God and get things straight with Him first. Because once you get things straight with God and He orders your steps, then everything else tends to fall in line, okay? So when we start looking at this journey to forgive, the journey to forgiving and forgiveness, it's not an easy one. It's not smooth. You got to climb up over some barriers to get to a place where that person can receive you, or where that person can get to a place where you will receive them. It's not easy. It is not a smooth road, okay? And when we start talking about forgiveness, the way God forgives and the way we forgive, the world has its own way of forgiving. Have you ever heard where someone has done someone wrong, and let's use a common example where a husband has cheated on their wife. And then the wife says, "You have to earn my forgiveness." Where's that in the Bible? Forgiveness is not something that we give out so that someone has to earn it. We have to forgive as God forgave us. And that's what the world will tell you, he got to earn my forgiveness. He hadn't done enough yet to earn my forgiveness. Has anyone ever heard that before? But that's how the world forgives. That's their concept. God's concept of forgiving involves love and looking beyond someone's faults, and not only seeing their needs, but also seeing your need to be released from the burden of having to carry that. Because there's a lot of anger that can come along with not forgiving. There can be a lot of sadness and depression that comes along with not forgiving. There can be a lot of loneliness and isolation that can come along with not forgiving. Who wants to carry that load around with them? I don't. So God has given us a way to release ourselves by forgiving the person that is wrong. Now, it doesn't mean that it's easy to do. It's not easy to do. So when we start looking at forgiveness, there's one of the things that the peacemaker model is really good at in this area. It identifies 4 promises of forgiveness. 4 promises of forgiveness. In order for you to really forgive God's way, you will want to try to do these 4 things where you can, okay? And then remember, we're dealing with the horizontal part of the relationship, not the vertical part, okay? So the first one is, I promise I won't dwell on the incident. In other words, I'm not going to hold on to it. The second one is, I promise I won't bring it up again and use it against you. You know how sometimes we bury the hatchet but keep the handle? So I promise I won't bring it up again and use it against you. And then I promise I won't talk to others about the incident. Ooh, that's a hard one right there, isn't it? Because when someone has hurt you, the first thing you want to do is you got to tell somebody that I have been wronged. Somebody needs to know that this person hurt me. The challenge that comes along with that, you need to be careful who you tell. Isn't that right? So when you say, hey, I won't talk to another about this, I'm not saying that it doesn't come to a place where you don't talk to your pastor or your counselor or something like that. Just make sure that whoever you talk to, that they know how to keep things confidential. Okay? Come on now. They need to keep things confidential. Some of us are like broke refrigerators. We can't keep nothing. And so we need to make sure, especially here at Faith in leadership, we're going to be going over ethics in leadership, in Christian leadership. And one of the things that we're going to be covering is how to handle confidential information. To make sure that if you go to your deacon, or if you go to your deaconess, or if you come to the pastor, or anyone in leadership, if someone in the choir comes to the choir president or the choir director, anyone in leadership, we need to know how to handle that information that's given us. We need to treat that information that someone's given us as a precious jewel to be guarded. Now, the other end of that, there's another end of that. When we also talk about ethics and confidentiality, we also, if someone comes to us and say, hey, I need to talk to you. What you need to do is say, hey, okay, is this something that you're expecting me to keep confidential? You have to fence the table or dress the table. And then not only do you ask them, is this something you expected me to keep confidential? Then you have to turn around and do number two. And number two is tell them, I want to let you know that while I'm able to receive confidential information, I'm also a mandatory reporter. Anybody ever heard of that? Being a mandatory reporter of confidential information? There are certain times where if one of our youth come to us and they say, hey, I got to talk to somebody about this, but I need you to keep this a secret. And then all of a sudden they tell you that their uncle raped them. Y'all understand what I'm saying? That's a mandatory reporting situation. Because there could be a situation where harm is either they could do harm to themselves or harm to another person. A person like that is in a fragile state of mind and needs help. And that person may need help that you cannot give. So when we have to say, when we say, hey, I promise I won't talk to others about the situation, you may need to go and talk to somebody, but just know that if you're expecting them to keep it in confidence, that confidentiality can only go so far depending on what it is, okay? I hope I help somebody out there today. Because a lot of times, relationships are torn apart because somebody told something that they expected to be kept what? In confidence. I told you that, and you had to go blab. Well, wait a minute, you said X, that you were going to burn down somebody's house. I had to go tell the person who lived in that house so they can get out, okay? So I know that that's an extreme example, but I did say that to make you smile a little bit, but we will come across some very serious situations. Whereas if you expect, your pastor to keep everything in confidence, I have to let you know that if you come to me and I see where there's a situation where you're going to harm yourself or harm others or something like that, was referred to as a mandatory reporter, okay? And I'm going to be expecting the people in leadership here at Faith to do the same. And so when we go back and we talk about conflicts and we talk about policies and procedures, that's another policy and procedure that we need to go ahead and get put on paper. So when there's a conflict with regard to what somebody has told you, then you will know exactly how you need to approach that situation. Okay? All right, so when we start talking about dwelling on incidents, dwelling on incidents, we have to know that there are some things that we just need to let go for our own sake. For our own sake, because it takes up so much time, so much energy. You lose sleep, being angry, being disappointed. What if we could go back in time and get all of the time back that we wasted being mad at somebody? That would be awesome, wouldn't it? But even in that situation, we learned some lessons, okay? So we have to be careful not to dwell on the situation, because that dwelling on that situation will cause us to stop moving forward in a way that God would have us to move forward, okay? So when we look at promise 2, I promise I won't bring the incident up and use it against you. That's a difficult one, because especially when the person that we're trying to forgive is what I refer to as a repeat offender. Have you ever been around a repeat offender? You forgive them for one thing, and the next thing you know, here they come, they doing it again. And sometimes you want to just remind them, hey, wait a minute, you just did that to me. And now I got to try to forgive you again for that. So that's a touchy one, but we have to understand what the circumstances are. If we just mad, sometimes we just get mad, and then we want to call somebody out. Well, that's not the time to do something like that, because then you're using what they did as a weapon. Have you ever heard of somebody holding something over somebody's head? Don't you hate that when it happens to you? Wait a minute, that happened 10 years ago. Wait a minute, that happened 5 years ago. Even if it happened a month ago, if you are spiritually mature, you need to know that, hey, at some point you need to stop talking about it. But also, I want to tell you again, that's easier said than done. You may have to go to a counselor. You may have to talk to someone about it in order for you to cope for yourself. And so I'm saying all of that, and I'm trying to qualify it, because there is someone who is out there in Facebook or YouTube land who have been in abusive relationships. Well, I don't expect you to just not bring the incident up again. I don't expect you not to dwell on it. I want you to remember, hey, that there's a better choice that needs to be made. And some in relationships and can't get out because they're stuck psychologically and they need help. And so we need to pray for them. So even though I'm putting these promises up here, I do recognize that everything is not always as cut and dry as I'd like it to be, okay? So when in doubt, go to someone who is trained or in a position to be able to handle the information that you're about to give them. I want every person in leadership here at Faith to be able to handle confidential information. I want them to be able to be seen in the congregation as trustworthy. And sometimes you might have some folks in leadership that you can't trust. Isn't that right? And so that is a challenge when you cannot be trusted to hold information, okay? So when we look at this, we want to say, I promise I won't talk to others about the incident, but we want to put an asterisk right there, because there's going to be a time when you really need to go ahead and talk to someone, but talk to the right person. Talk to someone who is trained to handle confidential information. Talk to someone who has